So the retro Predator 2 returns to the urban jungle, with Emilio Estevez on the run from a gun-toting, wisecracking Denis Leary in this 90s cult action thriller, Judgment Night. Suburban family man Frank Wyatt finally negotiates a night out with his buddies, after spending 3 months at home with a wife and his newborn child. Mike the Letterman jacket-wearing ladies' man, Ray the bullshit artist who weaseled a tricked-out RV off the lot for the night, and Frank's troublesome younger brother John head out together to Chicago for a premiere boxing event. However, after an incident on the jammed-up freeway, Ray convinces everyone he can get them to the main event on time. Yet the off-ramp leads to a desolate part of town where they inadvertently run a man over, but with Ray lying about there being no cell phone service to reach 911, they are soon confronted with a dangerous encounter. They find themselves directly in the path of Fallon, a vicious, wisecracking drug lord, whom their run-down victim turns out to be a disloyal henchman of. The four men then become witness to Fallon executing him in cold blood. Frank then torches and inadvertently destroys the busted-up RV in an attempt to escape. They then quickly become Fallon's unwilling prey in a savage game of cat and mouse, as they are mercilessly stalked through this urban maze. Hiding in train cars with the homeless, scrambling for cover in an unwelcoming housing complex, and trudging through the sewers for safety, they utterly fear for their lives, with the gun-toting criminals hot on their trail. After flushing them out of the train cars, Fallon recovers Frank's wallet from one of the vagrants, and begins to taunt Francis Howard Wyatt with the knowledge that he knows where his family lives. Later, when the guys attempt to traverse a rickety bridge across two rooftops, Ray chickens out, believing he can slickly negotiate his way out of this. But his choice proves fatal, leaving everyone unsure if they will be able to survive through this fateful night. So seeing its North American release date on October 15th, 1993, Judgment Night was produced by Largo Entertainment and distributed at the time by Universal Pictures, and sadly garnered very little at the box office, garnering only $12.1 million off of a $21 million budget. It became another stumbling block for the somewhat promising career of director Stephen Hopkins, who had done the Australian film Dangerous Game, then jumped on to Nightmare on Elm Street 5 Dream Child, and then Predator 2 after that, which didn't perform very well, and some other things after this still kind of left him on a little bit of rocky ground here and there and everywhere, but the entire process of getting up to making Judgment Night a film was kind of an interesting one. It came through a lot of different development hurdles to a certain degree, because started out with a screenplay from the late 80s from Kevin Jarre, who is a guy who had an uncredited draft on Rambo First Blood Part 2, was the guy who originally wrote and was going to direct Tombstone, and also had a story credit on Stephen Sommers' The Mummy. Whole thing kind of got bought up by producer Lawrence Gordon, who had produced like most of the Walter Hill films at the time and done like Die Hard, Predator, Point Break, stuff like that. But the thing kept kind of shuffling around. It kept getting passed off to different screenwriters, where a lot of very interesting names kind of got cropped up over time about who was involved with rewriting the script, including Jeb Stewart, who worked on the screenplay for Die Hard and later The Fugitive, but also John Carpenter worked on a draft. Kind of interesting type of thing, and it's kind of hit and miss era for John Carpenter. He worked on a draft for like this urban thriller who may have been a little evocative of maybe Assault on Precinct 13, or maybe just a little bit of Escape from New York there. Would have been interesting. Also, apparently Christopher Crowe did the screenplay for Michael Mann's The Last of the Mohicans, and also William Wisher, who co-wrote the screenplay for Terminator 2. So it's like just very talented screenwriters taking a stab at this whole thing, and maybe not cracking it so much for the production company, but ultimately landed in the hands of Lewis Collick, who actually has a couple of like kind of like domestic thrillers and other types of thrillers to his name. He did Unlawful Entry, the Ray Liotta, Kurt Russell film. He did Domestic Disturbance, which is Vince Vaughn and John Travolta, and also did the screenplay adaptation for Along Came a Spider. The entire thing kind of gets off in a certain way where Jarre's original screenplay was like much more darker, much more violent type of thing, which is like deeper, seedier types of things going on in the entire thing. And as people keep morphing it and changing it and kind of trying to adapt it to different things that would make it more appealing to a certain degree to studio executives or whatever the case was, kind of lands with Stephen Hopkins again after he done some stylish films. Elm Street 5 was not the most coherent film, but had a lot of style to it, did a lot of good things at the box office for him. Predator 2 still has a lot of good style, but again, didn't quite hit off with the critics, didn't quite hit off at the box office so well, but there was still a lot of potential you could mine from his talent, from his vision, stuff like that, where he could adapt into something very much like this. So much this urban thriller sort of thing where people are on the run, and there's a lot of shadowy images and all these interesting little scary, dangerous areas you could really kind of tap into. Very much an easy sort of transition from something like Predator 2 into this, where it's a little bit more scaled back than the more fantastical, highly gory stuff. You can still focus in on the elements of suspense and tension, stuff like that. And the vast majority of the production of the film did take place in Chicago, with a lot of long night shoots and not in the safest parts of the city, where there's a lot of things that happened that apparently there was a shooting that occurred during the filming of one scene that brought a lot of different law enforcement involved, the whole thing, and made things a little uneasy, but apparently Denis Leary, one of the main cast members, did try to keep things a little light on set to kind of like ease the tension somewhat and trying to just keep things a little bit more personable, a little bit higher spirits to a certain degree. But I think Stephen Hopkins does a very good job directing this film, along with his regular cinematographer Piero Levi, who had worked on almost all of his films from the 80s up through the early 2000s. Aside from Ghost in the Darkness, pretty much shot everything he did, and plus also just came off the Russell Mulcahy film Ricochet and did a couple other nice things here and there, but they did a really good job as a team here, creating a very stylish looking thriller here that, with everything pretty much set at night, you can have a certain thing where certain filmmakers, cinematographers, they want to make it too dark. But they made a very conscious choice to make sure that everything really did seem like it had a certain amount of contrast. You could see things very easily into the film and not get too bogged down in that type of style or whatnot, but there's such a good style here that Stephen Hopkins does have a very particular look to these early films, certain things with like wide angle lenses or the certain crane shots he has, like the whole thing when they're trying to cross that makeshift bridge between the two different apartment complexes, the entire big swinging camera shot he has there, that's completely something out of Predator 2 he did, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And they're shooting Super 35, but also he made it off to 2.35 to 1, and just it's still a very good looking film. Everything on his style is very much translates to the different aspect ratio here, using those certain wider lenses in certain places and whatnot to give a certain just wide landscape to the entire action of the film. I think it just crafts just a great kind of unsettling urban nighttime environment to the entire film. Just like, even though it's like kind of weird, it's like the streets are like completely desolate. There's nobody out. There's no cars driving around. There's no nothing. It's almost like it's a burned out husk of like the thing from like Escape from New York when they shot in the entire film. But it's just, it has a style, again, style to it. It has a very specific way of just crafting something that feels scary, very much ominous, almost oppressive to a certain degree. It feels like a urban maze to a certain degree. People who are out in these suburbs are very high affluent type of people in a certain way, very well-off people, never go anywhere close to an environment like this, and they're just trapped in this whole thing that just feels like it's an endless sprawl to them. Just like, it's a very good way of just settling it up and making very good use of just the light and shadow served very well. A lot of backlit type of moments in the entire film that look absolutely stunning. I like certain things when they get up to like the second half of the film. Start using these really nice split diopter shots that look to just evoke a certain feeling. Just like it's getting a little more, just pushing the style just a little bit further. A great interesting juxtaposition to the entire film. Like when you get into the climax of the film, when you got Estevez and Denis Leary going around this entire shop or whatnot, and they're shooting through all this crystal and glass and everything like that. Just very interesting visuals that make the film just more compelling, more captivating to your eye to a certain degree. So he very much knows, as a director and also along with his cinematographer here, knows how to make a film that just pops out to a certain degree. I like so much they use so much of the sodium vapor lights to create that sort of orange cast the entire film. It's just a very good looking film overall. Just everything comes together, flows together very well. His direction really just stands out in a very nice way. There was like certain things in the film are executed very well, but there are certain studio meddling things that kind of move the film away from certain places where I think it really could have been stronger to a certain degree. And certain other elements I feel like were just a little bit off. They could have made it a much stronger, excellent type of thriller. But moving on to the cast first, where the lead of the film, the character of Frank White, was a thing that was a little bit in question for quite a while here, because Stephen Hopkins originally thought about John Travolta for the role. But then apparently other people were thinking like, oh, they try to get Tom Cruise or try to get Christian Slater, and things are really coming down to the wire, and they really couldn't decide on anyone or really kind of get anyone locked into the entire role. So Emilio Estevez got paid $4 million for the role because, well, you're up against the wall. Either you're going to scrap the whole thing and take a freaking loss on the whole goddamn film, or you're just going to cast whoever is willing to take the role. And I like Emilio. I really like him. Again, I've covered Free Jack before, which is a major bomb, but I like him in it. I mean, Emilio, he had the two Young Guns films, which kind of establishes him as sort of an action-capable actor, but then he goes off and does, like, Loaded Weapon 1, and he does Mighty Ducks films, stuff like that. So he's got a very varied career, but you don't really think of him so much as, like, an action lead of some sort. But he's got such the great everyman quality you need for this role here, to get a guy who's this suburban, safe family man and gets thrust in this entire urban nightmare situation. Still need to find a guy who's very empathetic. You can really connect with him, and he feels like he has that family values sensibility to him, but still can bring the conviction, bring all the qualities you really need to the forefront of the film to drive the narrative forward, and he absolutely has all that. He brings all those qualities to the forefront, where he's got the compassion, the empathy, the quality of just being a stand-up moral type of guy. He's not gonna pawn off this guy they ran over with the RV in a certain way and just kind of like run off and just kind of save their own butts. He's very much a guy who just does the right things in the right situations and has that fantastic committed quality about him. There's like, he believes that they can all make it through this thing if they stick together. If none of them kind of fall apart or anything else like that, he can just hold them together, hold their wits together. They can get through this whole thing. He just keeps pushing that sensibility through determination. Also, the love for his family, including his own brother, who's just kind of this ragtag type of unreliable type of guy, but he brings all these qualities forward and just tries to tether everyone, kinds of bring people in and make them understand they have to go at this the right way and not kind of lose who they are in a certain way. I like this entire quality he has in the entire film. He just absolutely steps up to the game this whole thing. And mostly feels very much convincing the role. There's maybe a few moments here and there where he's trying to be a little more tough towards Denis Leary's character that feels a little less than convincing to a certain degree, but there's a lot of good things he brings to the forefront of the film. I think he does lead the film very strongly. I think he makes it a very good, solid role for himself. It very much shines overall. Even though the film doesn't do well, maybe not reviewed as well, I think it still came off very, very well. I think all the performances pretty much come off very well in the whole film. But you move over to Denis Leary. Very interesting talent to a certain degree, because at this point in time, his stand-up comedian career is sort of skyrocketing to a certain degree, but amidst accusations that he stole a lot of his act from comedian Bill Hicks, including a lot of stuff in his No Cure for Cancer special and all that type of stuff. And he'd been doing such hot stuff that he did like 6 different films in this entire year. And if you add in like The Ref, which comes out like, oddly, his Christmas film that comes out in March the following year, but that's like 17 films within a 13th month span. Interesting, the other film that came off that was much, much bigger hit for him, Demolition Man, came out the week before Judgment Night in October of 1993. So, such a thing. It was big hot property. Even he was doing these weird vignettes for freaking MTV at the time, just doing random stand-up stuff for just like 30 seconds on the station and whatnot. Just like, it's another hot guy, get him on the whole thing. He's on the cusp of pop culture and whatnot. Who cares? But it's like, the interesting thing is, like, later on, I think Denis Leary becomes a really fantastic actor. I like him even in Suicide Kings with Christopher Walken and stuff like that. I think he's absolutely fantastic in that thing. Later on, doing stuff like Rescue Me and a whole bunch of other things. Does fantastic work. This point in time, it's that weird type of 90s thing where you get a hot comedian in the entire film, and they kind of like want to go off in their shtick or whatnot for like 2 or 3 minutes some point in the entire film. Like when he's up there on the rooftop working with Jeremy Piven's character, he's trying to negotiate the entire thing, kind of schmoozing to a certain degree, trying to work his way out of the situation. Leary just feels like he just goes off into his freaking act for about 2 or 3 minutes there in the entire film, and just like, the fact I don't find him terribly threatening or scary the entire film. He's very entertaining. But for this character of Fallon, who you feel like he's just the way he's presenting the entire film, how they photograph him, how they kind of present him, he's supposed to be threatening, intimidating type of character. I don't get that from Leary's performance in the entire film. It feels like he's just kind of being too comical. He's too much wisecracking. He's got too many things where he's just kind of like ad-libbing so many things. There's certain points that they are writing certain things. They feel like if they cast a more intimidating actor, it would come off very much just a very sort of ominous presence in the entire film, just very menacing. I feel like Leary's just not quite tuned in to what the tone of the film really needs to be. I feel like when you got Peter Greene as one of his henchmen his right-hand man is Sykes here. It's like, I know Peter Greene. He's a fantastic actor. If you've seen him in The Mask as the villain and that, or you saw his little role as Redfoot in The Usual Suspects, this guy could have pulled off that role exactly that way. He could have stepped up, made an intimidating villain, just make him very much a heavy in the entire film. That really would have clicked so much better, because again, there's certain lines of dialogue, certain things that are going on in the film, especially towards the climax when Fallon's trying to goad Frank in the entire thing and trying to say like he's going to go off and pay a visit to his wife and all these other things. Like, it feels like it should be horribly frightening dialogue to be spouting off and really getting the tension up so much, but because Leary's just playing a little bit more that kind of like razor tongue type of thing he usually does, it just doesn't feel quite as impactful as it could. But I feel like a guy like Peter Greene standing right next to the entire film really could have taken it in a different direction or just punched it up so much more. So it's kind of interesting that they really cast Leary because he's such a hot property at the time. But I feel like they just didn't quite hit the mark in terms of casting the right guy for the role to get the most out of the performance there. But there's kind of the thing in the entire meddling of the film from the studio and stuff like that, where they started looking at dailies or whatnot. I feel like the film just felt too bleak. It felt like it was way too dark. It didn't feel like it was very much appealing to a certain degree. So they told whoever was on the film, the producers or the actors or something like that, to kind of inject more humor into it to make it a little bit lighter. So I don't know if that was something that happened because of that, or if it's just because that's the type of actor Leary was at the time. That he was much more comedic instead of much more of a heavy dramatic actor. So I don't know exactly where that entire shift goes and where that sort of blame kind of lays on the feet of anyone. I feel like as written, it should be a much more intimidating type of role, but as it's performed, not so much. But I do like how the first act kind of sets up all of Frank's family and his friends. We got Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character of Mike here, which is like still trying to hold on to that old high school football jock type of things. He can swoon the ladies and stuff like that. So they did up that a couple of times when they kind of like right at the beginning, then when they get into the traffic accident and stuff like that, kind of showing still like they're all kind of immature guys. You got and that problematic brother portrayed by Stephen Dorff, John Wyatt, where it's like he's unreliable, he's a little ragtag, a little ragged type of character, but he kind of, as the film goes along, you see as he gets entrenched in the fear and all these different things that he does sort of get matured up to a certain degree. Gets a little bit more forged, gets a little more tamed down. It's like he's not so much that impulsive, volatile character at the beginning. He just kind of clings much more onto his brother and stuff like that to kind of maintain potential hope for the situation there. But you gotta talk about Jeremy Piven in the whole film, who's had a lot of just bad allegations levied against him for the last several years. But in terms of his performance in this whole film and the character he portrays, he's just a real scummy type of friend to a certain degree. He's like this guy who thinks he can wheel and deal people, kind of schmooze him out of a situation, all this type of thing, talk himself in and out of everything he wants to. And he's just this kind of perfect wild card catalyst in our films. Like, blows things way out of proportion to a certain degree. He's always the guy who's making the wrong decisions at the wrong points in time, driving them off the freeway, trying to take a detour so they can get to the damn boxing match, and getting this stupid fucking RV. It was like, if anyone's tried to park anywhere in Chicago, you know it's the most impractical vehicle to possibly try to do that with. It's terrible. But the fact is, he's just trying to shine people on and all this type of stuff, trying to boast himself up by doing all these different things. And of course, gets all the situations. He's not paying attention. He's got this gun in the entire thing, which escalates things further. And it's like when they run over the guy with the RV on the street and then they go check on him. Then they tell Ray to call 911 to get some help for the guy. But Ray plays it off like he couldn't get connection, even though he's full of shit. He actually got connected to him and just kind of freaks out and kind of goes knee-jerk at the whole thing, where he's just like completely selfish, self-centered type of character. It does this whole schmooze thing to get the RV for the occasion, for the night, from the dealer. So now he's driving around saying that's not his, and he doesn't have any coverage on it, and he's going to get in trouble, and he's been boozing and stuff like that. Then he kind of throws all the booze out to kind of cover up the evidence of some things, even though he's so erratic on everything. It's like, you've already drank a whole bunch of vodka. You're already condemnable at that end of things. So it's like, this character just puts himself deeper and deeper into the shit, and then just gets up the entire point in the whole film when he's up there on the rooftop and he's too freaked out whatsoever to go across that makeshift bridge that goes between the two apartment complexes, that he just freaks out. It's like, I'm going to try to smooze. I'm going to just completely go full Ellis from Die Hard in this situation. It's like, Hans Booby, I'm your white knight. And then he's just trying to thinks he can talk his way out of anything, kind of negotiate the whole situation, where he's way over his head in this whole thing. Fallon and all those guys, they're not letting him go. He's playing along with them. Screwing around with him, because now he's got nowhere to go anyway. You might as well fuck around with the guy for 5 minutes and let him think he's getting somewhere, and just kind of fuck him over. The end of the whole thing. So it's like he digs himself deeper every step of the way. Makes one decision that makes the next decision even worse. All these different things just pile up on the character to a degree, and just like it shows that entire thing where you have to have one of the guys bite it. You have to have that escalation in the story where one of these guys takes the wrong decision and does something that condemns his fate to a certain degree to just make the threat even more dire. And that's just exactly what this character ends up having to do, and it is portrayed fantastically. Absolutely perfectly by him. So it's such a really excellent piece of the cog in this whole story that really exemplifies that sort of immature, childish nature of these friends that Frank has, that his wife is so much kind of like lambasting him about it at the beginning of the film. And they constantly kind of showed that whole thing, but like Guggen Jr.'s character, he kind of has all these things where he starts getting more volatile as the film goes along. Once he gets that gun and kills one of the guys, he starts getting a little bit off the rails and whatnot. He's getting a lot more hostile to a certain degree. He's being more combative and stuff like that. So the film still escalates their situations. It kind of drives them off in different ways. So it's like it strains them, it tears them a little bit apart here and there. But I like how Emilio Estevez, the character, tries to forge them back together as a group or whatnot, and tries to get them back in line so they can survive through the rest of the situation. So I think it's all very well cast. Aside from Leary's character, where it's just like, again, it just feels like you got a really good guy who eventually becomes a fantastic actor. With maybe if he did this Mitch later on, it would have been more on point. But everyone else, I think, slots in the roles very, very well. Another altered cog in this entire thing, after they already had the thing where like, well, I kind of change up the tone, kind of alleviate it a little bit here and there. Kind of affected Alan Silvestri's score here, because originally he wrote and composed a score that was much more electronic based, fitting much more into like a dark thriller or even like a horror-esque score to a certain degree. But probably Stephen Hopkins and some of the filmmakers involved in the whole thing really didn't want that approach. They wanted to go for a much more action-oriented score that honestly just sounds like he kind of copy and pasted a lot of the stuff directly from Predator 2, which Hopkins kind of wanted the feel for that, but it's like, I don't really like it that much. I feel like if you went and listened to the couple of tracks that were released on the Entrada Special Edition score, the complete version of it, they did include a couple of tracks that were from the original score, and it sounds way better. I can just feel like this film with that score would be a lot more tension. Just a lot more edgy type of quality to it, because I feel like it is much more leaning towards the action end of things, the vibe of the whole thing, when everything feels like it should be executed much more towards like real kind of edgy suspense type of stuff in the whole film. Feels like it's driving much more like action beats or whatnot. The excitement in the films of the quieter, more tense moments of the whole thing, where I feel like listening to these tracks, it sounds like it would be a completely different experience to the entire film. Still a good score in terms of just like Silvestri, it has a good high-end quality to him, but it feels just too derivative. It feels too derivative with the stuff he's already done, and some other things he's already kind of like repeating himself to a certain degree. Obviously later on in his career, he'd be much more diverse in what he was doing and make much more fantastic and much more varied scores to a certain degree. But at this point in time, it feels like a lot of people are just having him recycle the same old stuff, and it just doesn't feel quite as refreshing or quite as unique to the films as they could be. So I think that other score, the electronic-based stuff, just feels a lot more ominous, has a lot more mood to it, a lot more atmosphere to it to a certain degree, that I feel like it would just propel the film much further. If you just kind of, it did scale back the kind of comedy from the character of Fallon, and did have much more this just riveting score on top of it, with a lot more just focusing much more in on the atmosphere of the entire film, I think it would have just changed the complexion so much. I think it would have worked even better than it does. But the big other thing to kind of talk about is like there's just strange, this film, which wasn't kind of remarkable to any degree, and then obviously doesn't perform at the box office, had this major soundtrack that was just this melding of rap and hard rock and alternative rock type of stuff. So it got stuff from Helmet and House of Pain, Slayer and Ice-T, Pearl Jam and Cypress Hill, just like big names in both these fields just come together, just make this major sort of amalgamation, compilation album that kind of stands out beyond the actual film itself. This thing has gotten like retrospectives from Rolling Stone and all these different things. Like, it's a widely acclaimed soundtrack album where most people probably don't even think about the film involved with the soundtrack. If you got the soundtrack, there's a lot of people probably have it that never even seen the goddamn movie. But they like all the tracks. Me, it's not my flavor of stuff. But it fits for the style of the film, a much more urban film, kind of doing the inner city type of thing. But even though you have like, the whole thing is like, it's kind of like an Irish mob gangster or whatnot. It's not dealing with like a direct like inner city sort of gang to that sort of ethnic sort of demographic type of thing. You'd kind of think from Chicago, South Side or something else like that. It feels very kind of weird that it went that route with like an Irish mobster when you're trying to do this like inner city nightmare type of thing and the urban landscape stuff. And even again, it still kind of has that flavor in the whole thing. And of course, Everlast, who is one of the lead singers of House of Pain, is one of Fallon's freaking henchmen in the whole film. And of course goes on to a major sort of solo career after that, stuff like that. So interesting type of stuff. They're obviously developing that entire idea as they were going into the film and having this major producer of Happy Walters involved the whole thing, kind of reaching out and grabbing all these types of things. And apparently there's supposed to be one between Rage Against the Machine and Tool that did kind of get produced, but they never released the track officially. It kind of floats around, get leaked out here and there and everything like that. But interesting, and probably a major type of thing for anyone to delve into if that's your sort of flavor or whatnot. But wasn't really mine, but still, again, like I said, aids the film to that vibes and that sort of thing overall. But it was a major type of part of this whole film that definitely kind of supersedes the film itself. But one major thing that happened with the film a few weeks after its initial release was that a Bronx, New York screening, a shooting occurred that ended up being very fatal and got the film a very bad reputation, and the film actually got pulled from theaters because of that. Similar thing that happened to The Warriors back in 1979, where the film was so gang-focused that it kind of brought in a lot of rival gangs at various showings of the film, and a lot of violence broke out in that regard, so that film also got a bad reputation off of that, but Judgment Night did get curtailed on its box office because of that incident. But on the whole with Judgment Night, I think it's a film that really gets held together very well by its stylish direction. Most of the performances are very good, and the mood of the film overall, and just like, it's not perfect with the pacing. You might feel like some things a little loose in some places, and they're kind of retreading ground when they're going into the whole thing where the incident and the freaking in traffic or whatnot. They're trying to at least kind of further establish personalities in that regard, or in terms of Frank's entourage of guys or whatnot. But Hopkins keeps the film sort of energetic to a certain degree and tries to feed into suspense and tension or whatnot in certain slower moments, where I feel like, again, if you had the other Silvestri score, it would have heightened that so much more. The action-oriented stuff doesn't quite hit the button so much to get you on the razor's edge of feeling as much tension in the film as you could. But I think just, again, most of the performances really do hit off very strongly to make the film continue to move forward so much. You know, like most of the characters aren't that layered. They're not that deep to a certain degree, but they facilitate action in the plot and they move the thing forward and they have good dynamics. Everyone has very good chemistry overall. And still you kind of buy the whole, a little bit of a link there between Fallon and Frank and whatnot to a certain degree. Leary and Estevez, they do have at least a good sort of back and forth to a certain degree in the whole film. When you get up to the climax and they're kind of fighting and whatnot, they're kind of grappling in a certain way, it works off well enough. I don't think the climax is as strong as you possibly could have it. It just feels a little, I don't know, shortchanged that he just kind of knocks him over onto the freaking staircase and he's just dead at that point in time. It just feels like not as much bang at the end of the film. It feels a little shortchanged to a certain degree. It doesn't feel quite as heightened as possible. So it's still a good sort of thriller to a certain degree that does show its hand being very 90s. Like, if you made this film 10 years later, it just wouldn't work. All the trappings of the film just absolutely fall apart because you've got much better cell phone service or whatnot. Everyone in the film would have a cell phone. They'd all have GPS. They would never get lost in the city and whatnot. It's like, none of it would fall together whatsoever. It's like, you couldn't make this film much later on than 1993 to have all these machinations still have some logic to them to a certain degree. So all that type of stuff, it feels very 90s in its style and its execution, the concept overall, and of course the soundtrack as well is very much of its time. So it's like, it's still a very good quality thriller. I'm not going to say it's quite solid to a certain degree, but it's still entertaining, it's still exciting. It's not the top echelon of stuff you could get from this type of thriller to a certain degree, but I think there's a lot of good qualities in the whole thing that I feel like it still holds together very well. I just think it's, I don't know if it's notable or whatnot, but if you follow Stephen Hopkins' career, it is notable to a certain degree. Most of his stuff kind of transitioned into TV. It doesn't do quite as many films as it used to, but if he's still working and still having a good job and having a good time of it and still very satisfied with it, that's all good for me. But guys, I'd really much like to hear what you feel about Judgment Night. And there's always the Patreon to contribute something every month, get a little early access to things, and also there's these Super Things feature on YouTube, so you can, anything you love around here, you can just hit up the Super Things, donate something to the channel, and keep things going around here very smoothly. So guys, very much thank you for checking things out, liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing links around is a major help to everything. So guys, thanks so much, take care, bye-bye.